How can our animals show us more about the human condition than humans can? When the curtains close and the lights come up, Miracolo a Milano and Umberto D leave audiences with markedly different feelings. While these films were made by Vittorio De Sica just 1 year apart, the vision of each film could not be more different in content, style, and tone. In Miracolo a Milano, De Sica tackles issues of class disparity and poverty through fantasy and satire. In Umberto D, De Sica uses typical neorealist techniques, such as non-professional actors, a simple storyline, and raw human emotion, to show audiences the everyday challenges of an everyday man. Nonetheless, a similarity between these two films emerges. They both feature animals. These animals come to demonstrate two distinct approaches to depicting the struggles of those living in Italy. Towards the end of Miracolo a Milano, the protagonist, Totò, receives a dove that grants his every wish and proceeds to give members of his squatter community anything they desire. In Umberto D, Umberto has a dog, Flake, who sticks by his side throughout the entire film until the bitter end. The symbolism of these two animals is really hard to miss. Dogs are popularly known as man's best friend or loyal creatures, while doves commonly represent peace and love. In the context of these two films, the two animals show two contrasting attitudes towards post-war struggles, the dove as hope and the dog as devastation. These two opposite attitudes are supported by the overall tone of each film, separated by their outlooks on what life meant for people living in war-torn Italy. Fantasy comes to life in Miracolo a Milano. Made in 1951, De Sica follows the trials and tribulations of Totò, a young boy who loses his mother figure at a young age. After living in an orphanage for an unspecified number of years, Totò is released into the wild to fend for himself and joins a community of squatters on the outskirts of Milan. He takes the initiative to make the shanty town a desirable location to live, encouraging growth and education.
Questi re! È così, I bambini imparano qualcosa.
As he grows up, he becomes the leader, and everyone looks to him for help. Scores of people live here.
In fondo a destra. Lei è sola?
No, il marito, il bambino e la domestica.
There is a strong sense of camaraderie and pride amongst the residents. And Totò's leadership ensures everyone is fed and taken care of, no matter how little they have. A threat emerges for the squatters, though. Greedy landowners want to take back the land that the squatters live on. They resist and convince the landowner, initially, to let them stay. But when oil is discovered under the shanty town, they try to forcibly evict the residents. The difference between the squatters and the landowners is comically pronounced to the nth degree. Now this is where the bird comes in. The ghost of Totò's mother visits him, delivering a dove that will grant his every wish. Now, Totò could do anything that he wants with this bird, escape his situation, or get some things for himself. But instead of using the dove to acquire things for himself, he is completely selfless. Everyone can get what they want, no matter how poor they are. It's a mockery of humans' materialistic tendencies in a capitalist system. Fur coats once worn by only the richest are now donned by the poorest. Chandeliers and armoires are taken into shacks. In a showdown between the squatters and the evictors, Totò actually uses the bird to ward off the advances of the landowners. uses the dove's magical powers exclusively to help others, making the audience and the other characters laugh all the while.
Bravo!
Totò is good to his core. The dove hasn't changed anything fundamental about him, but it has given him the opportunity to act in selfless ways that he has always wanted to.
Totò, apri Totò, fammi un piacere personale. Totò.
Io non sono niente, sono soltanto Totò.
Besides the material gifts, what Totò has ultimately given to his community is a sense of hope, a hope for the future, the hope that someday they just might be able to get these things for themselves without the magic bird. But if you have a magic bird, you might as well use it. The 1952 film Umberto D is a close and careful portrayal of the life of an older, struggling man and his dog, Flyke, that grapples with issues of poverty, aging, and interpersonal relationships. We stay with Umberto throughout the film, forced to watch as he goes through failure after failure. The overall tone of the film is very dirty and down to earth, without the elements of fantasy and romanticization that we see in Miracolo a Milano. Really, the film is what you would think of when you think of neorealism, the difficulty of the everyday, and the lengths that a person has to go through in order to survive that day. Umberto rents a small room from a well-to-do woman in Rome. He befriends the young maid, a sweet and strong woman who tries to look out for him.
Signor Umberto, mangiati la pizza dolce.
No.
Che c'hai, signor Umberto?
Stanco.
Di quella là?
Un po' di tutto.
Dovunque andrai, signor Umberto, state meglio di qua.
But when he can't pay his debts, the landlord tells him he cannot stay at the apartment anymore. Umberto is relegated to fend for himself. The dog, Flyke, sticks with Umberto for most of the film. Umberto loves him dearly, but he is struggling to get by and to take care of the dog. At one point, Umberto goes to the hospital when he is threatened to be evicted, leaving Flyke behind. At the hospital, another desperate patient without a home convinces the nurse to give Umberto special treatment because
È tanto buono, gli piacerebbe restare qualche altro giorno qua dentro per potesse curare. Non lo vede come è sciupato, poveraccio. Pensi che danno una pensione che non gli basta manco per mantenere il cane.
as much as he loves the dog, Umberto keeps trying to get rid of Flyke, as if he is trying to shake off a problem that he just cannot deal with anymore on top of everything else. But this is hard. He loves Flyke a lot. He speaks about Flyke with love.
Lei? Un bastardo con gli occhi intelligenti, bianco, pezzato.
He just can't get rid of him. Now, after the hospital scene, Umberto loses Flyke. He goes to the pound, trying to find him, and he does. They reunite. And it's almost sweet, except for the fact that had Umberto been just a couple minutes later, Flyke would have been killed. One of the most lucid moments in the whole film that shows Umberto's low situation as a human is when he finds himself so lost that he has to beg for money. Ashamed, he has Flyke beg instead, passing the responsibility of keeping them afloat.
Sta fermo!
He tries to get rid of Flyke again and again.
Tu gli vuoi proprio bene, Fran? Proprio?
Sì.
Allora te lo regalo.
But it always backfires.
Ora vuole cani. Su, andiamo.
Senta,
Despite Umberto's neglect, Flyke is almost there. When the film ends, Flyke even comes back to Umberto after he has played with the idea of killing him. Umberto cannot live without him, and Flyke cannot live with him. But for Flyke, loyalty to his human trumps the habitual hardship that they have seen. Umberto and Flyke's relationship is, in part, defined by this loyalty and love, but more so as it relates to their shared experiences and an endurance through hardship together. Both of these films capture what it means to exist through the relationships with animals. And the animals are really indicative of the director's larger attitude toward the hardship of life during this period. While relationship between Toto and the bird shows us hope and the possibility of happiness despite struggle, Flyke and Umberto's relationship shows us what it means to wallow. And besides the narrative, these interpretations are embedded into the animals themselves. The idea of a grounded, earthly dog recalls wallowing and an inhibition of freedoms, whereas the dove reminds us of freedom through flight and the celestial. In the end, while Umberto walks with his feet heavy on the ground, Toto literally flies. We see similarities in the narratives too, where Toto and Umberto are on separate sides of the same situation. An example of this is suicide by oncoming train. While Umberto considers doing this himself, Toto saves one of the community members from doing it himself. Both of the animals are extensions of the self. Umberto's need to scavenge in order to survive mirrors the needs of Flyke, a creature that has to scavenge, and Toto's selflessness is reflected in how he uses the bird to help others. Now, while no Panacean dove may appear during times of hardship, there is always the sense of hope that can prevail. And perhaps this shows the larger takeaway of returning to neorealist films, especially in 2020, a universally difficult year. De Sica presents us with two different ways to cope with these challenges and leaves it up to us to decide.